Vanessa Crawford screamed at the homeless man that he smelled like trash and ordered him out of her building in front of a dozen witnesses. An hour later, that same man walked into her office in an expensive suit as her new chief financial officer, and everything she had built was suddenly at risk. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The smell hit Vanessa Crawford before she even saw him. It was the acrid, unmistakable stench of unwashed humanity mixed with something else. Something that made her stomach turn. She had just stepped into the gleaming marble lobby of Crawford Industries, her 5-inch heels clicking with purposeful authority against the polished floor, when she noticed the figure hunched near the reception desk. He was wearing layers of tattered clothing, a filthy coat that might have once been blue, and his matted hair hung in greasy clumps around a face obscured by an unkempt beard. A shopping cart sat beside him, filled with what looked like the collected debris of a dozen dumpsters. Vanessa's perfectly manicured hand flew to her nose. The receptionist, a young woman named Kelly, looked up with wide, helpless eyes, clearly at a loss for how to handle the situation. The security guard, Marcus, was approaching cautiously, his hand hovering near his radio. But Vanessa didn't need help. This was her building, her company, her kingdom, and this man, whoever he was, had no business polluting it with his presence. "You smell like trash," she said, her voice cutting through the pristine lobby like a knife. The words weren't loud, but they carried. Every head in the vicinity turned. The handful of early morning employees waiting for elevators froze mid-conversation. The man looked up slowly, his eyes meeting hers for just a fraction of a second before dropping back to the floor. That brief glimpse revealed something unexpected, a clarity and intelligence that seemed at odds with his appearance. But Vanessa was too angry, too disgusted to register it. "Get out," she continued, her voice rising now, infused with all the authority of a woman who had built an empire from nothing. "Get out of my building right now. You don't belong here. This is a place of business, not a homeless shelter. Marcus, call the police if he doesn't leave immediately." The man didn't move. He simply stood there, swaying slightly, his shoulders hunched. Vanessa felt a surge of fury. How dare he ignore her? How dare he stand there like some pathetic monument to failure in the middle of everything she had worked so hard to create? "Do you hear me?" she shouted now, all pretense of composure gone. "You smell like garbage. You look like garbage. You are garbage. Get out before I have you thrown out." Her finger was extended, pointing at him like a weapon, her face flushed with rage. The man finally moved. He shuffled toward the revolving door, pushing his cart with a resigned slowness that only infuriated Vanessa more. As he passed, the smell intensified, and she actually gagged. The moment he was outside, she whirled on Marcus. "How did he even get in here?" she demanded. "You're supposed to be watching the doors. Do your job or I'll find someone who will." Marcus stammered an apology, something about a delivery entrance being left unlocked. Vanessa didn't wait to hear the rest. She strode to the elevator, her blood still boiling, jabbing the button repeatedly as if she could will it to arrive faster. The small crowd in the lobby had gone silent, everyone suddenly very interested in their phones or the floor. Good, she thought. Let them see what happens when standards slip. Let them remember who's in charge. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor did nothing to calm her nerves. She was the CEO of Crawford Industries, a woman who had clawed her way up from poverty to build a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate empire. She had fought off hostile takeovers, navigated recessions, and outlasted every man who had tried to tell her she didn't belong in the boardroom. She had earned her success through ruthless efficiency and an unwillingness to tolerate anything less than perfection. And part of that perfection was maintaining an image. Her buildings were pristine. Her employees were professional. Her reputation was spotless. A homeless man wandering into her lobby was not just an inconvenience, it was an insult. She reached her office, a sprawling corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Her assistant, Jennifer, was already at her desk, looking nervous. "Good morning, Miss Crawford," Jennifer said carefully. "I have your coffee ready and the agenda for today's board meeting. I also wanted to remind you that the new CFO is starting today. He's scheduled to meet with you at 9 o'clock. Vanessa had almost forgotten. The previous CFO, a competent but uninspiring man named Gerald, had retired a month ago. The search for his replacement had been exhaustive. The board had interviewed dozens of candidates, all with impeccable credential. The final choice had been made last week. A man named David Thornton, headhunted from a competitor. His resume was impressive: a Harvard MBA, 15 years of experience, a track record of turning struggling companies around. The board had been unanimous in their approval. Vanessa herself had signed off on the hire without ever meeting him, trusting the board's judgment. "Fine," Vanessa said curtly, taking the coffee from Jennifer's outstretched hand. "Make sure he's on time. I don't have patience for tardiness today." She spent the next hour reviewing reports, her mind still occasionally drifting back to the incident in the lobby. The image of that man, hunched and pathetic, kept intruding on her thoughts. She pushed it away. She had more important things to worry about than some random vagrant who had wandered in off the street. At precisely 9 o'clock, Jennifer buzzed her. "Miss Crawford, Mr. Thornton is here to see you." "Send him in," Vanessa said, straightening the files on her desk and adopting her most professional expression. The door opened and a man man walked in. For a moment, Vanessa's brain simply refused to process what her eyes were seeing. It couldn't be. It was impossible, but there was no mistaking it. The man standing in her doorway, dressed now in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven, was the same man she had screamed at in the lobby less than 2 hours ago. "Good morning, Miss Crawford," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I'm David Thornton, your new chief financial officer. I believe we've already met, though under somewhat different circumstances." He extended his hand, and Vanessa noticed it was perfectly clean, the nails manicured, the skin smooth. There was no trace of the filth and grime she had seen earlier. It was as if the homeless man had been a ghost, a hallucination, but she knew it wasn't. She knew with absolute certainty that this was the same person. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time in perhaps 20 years, Vanessa Crawford was speechless. David Thornton smiled, a small, knowing expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I apologize for the unusual introduction," he continued. "I believe in understanding a company from the ground up, or in this case, from the outside in. You learn a lot about an organization's values by how it treats those it considers beneath it." Vanessa felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back in a hot wave of humiliation. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. "I don't understand," she finally managed, her voice a hoarse whisper. You looked," she trailed off, unable to articulate the chaos in her mind. "I was homeless," David finished for her. "Or rather, I was pretending to be. It's something I do before I take a new position. Call it research. Call it a social experiment. Call it whatever you like. The results are always illuminating." He walked further into the office, uninvited, and settled into one of the leather chairs opposite her desk with the ease of someone who belonged there. "You see, Miss Crawford," he said, crossing one leg over the other, "numbers and spreadsheets only tell you part of a company's story. The real story is in how people behave when they think no one important is watching, how they treat the receptionist, how they talk to the janitor, how they react to someone they perceive as powerless. That's when you see the truth." And Vanessa realized with a sinking, nauseating certainty that he had seen her truth. He had seen her at her absolute worst. Cruel and dismissive and vicious. The woman who prided herself on her professionalism, on her leadership, had been exposed as something far uglier. The carefully constructed image she had spent decades building felt like it was crumbling around her. "This is highly irregular," she said, trying to regain some measure of control. "The board should have been informed of this test." David raised an eyebrow. "The board hired me to do a job, Miss Crawford. They hired me to assess this company's financial health and make recommendations. That's exactly what I'm doing. They didn't specify my methods. Besides," he leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady and uncomfortably penetrating, "this wasn't just about the company, this was about you." Vanessa felt her hands trembling. She clasped them together in her lap, out of sight beneath the desk. "What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "I mean," he said, his voice quiet now but no less powerful, "that you are the face of this company. You set the tone, you establish the culture, and if the CEO treats human beings like garbage, what does that say about the values of Crawford Industries?" The words hit her like physical blows. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to point out that she had built this company from nothing, that she had every right to protect it from unwanted intrusion, but the words died in her throat, because deep down, beneath the layers of justification and pride, she knew he was right. She had been cruel, unnecessarily, viciously cruel to a man she perceived as powerless. And now that man held tremendous power over her future. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Outside the windows, the city hummed with its usual indifferent energy. Inside this office, Vanessa Crawford's world was shifting on its axis, and she had no idea how to stop it. Quote, David Thornton didn't seem to be in any hurry to fill the silence. He sat there perfectly composed, watching her with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. Vanessa realized he was waiting for her to speak, to explain herself, to offer some kind of response to his devastating assessment. But what could she possibly say? That she had been having a bad morning? That she was under stress? That homeless people made her uncomfortable? Every excuse that formed in her mind sounded hollow and pathetic even before it reached her lips. "I should have handled that differently," she finally said, the words feeling like broken glass in her mouth. It was an admission of fault that she rarely made, and it tasted bitter. David tilted his head slightly, his expression unchanged. "Yes," he agreed simply, "you should have. But let me ask you something, Miss Crawford. Was that behavior unusual for you, or is that how you typically treat people you consider beneath your state?" The question was like a scalpel, precise and cutting. Vanessa wanted to insist that it was unusual, that she was normally kind and respectful to everyone, but she couldn't, because if she was being honest with herself, truly honest, she knew that her treatment of the homeless man was simply the most extreme version of something she did every day. The dismissive way she spoke to the cleaning staff, the impatience she showed toward junior employees, the way she walked past people without acknowledging their existence, existence, unless they were important enough to warrant her attention. I built this company from nothing, she said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. I started with one property and turned it into an empire. I've had to be tough. I've had to be demanding. You don't get to where I am by being soft. David nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. You're absolutely right, he said. Success requires discipline, standards, high expectation. But there's a difference between being demanding and being cruel. There's a difference between holding people accountable and treating them as if they're disposable. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. I've read your company's mission statement, Miss Crawford. Excellence, integrity, and respect. Those are the three pillars you claim Crawford Industries is built on. But I spent 45 minutes in your lobby this morning, and I didn't see any of those values. I saw a security guard who was afraid to do his job because he didn't want to upset you. I saw employees who looked the other way because it was easier than getting involved. I saw a CEO who was more concerned with appearances than with basic human decency. Vanessa felt something dark and uncomfortable twisting in her chest. It felt like shame, an emotion she had taught herself to bury years ago. She had learned early in life that shame was weakness, that guilt was a luxury successful people couldn't afford. But sitting here now under David Thornton's unwavering gaze, all those carefully constructed defenses were crumbling. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. An apology? A confession? My resignation? David shook his head. I don't want anything from you, Miss Crawford. I was hired to be your CFO, and that's what I intend to do, but I think you should want something from yourself. He stood up, smoothing his already immaculate suit. I'll be in my office reviewing the quarterly financials. We can discuss the numbers at this afternoon's board meet, but I'd suggest you spend some time today thinking about what kind of leader you actually want to be, not just what kind of leader you think you are. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing, he said, turning back to face her. That man you threw out of the lobby this morning, the homeless version of me, I watched you for a full minute before you even noticed I was there. Do you know what I saw? I saw a woman who looked exhausted, not just tired, but bone-deep exhausted, worn down, like she's been running so hard for so long that she's forgotten why she started running in the first place. Maybe this isn't just about how you treat other people. Maybe it's also about how you're treating yourself. Then he was gone, leaving Vanessa alone in her enormous office that suddenly felt suffocatingly small. She sat frozen in her chair for several minutes, her mind a chaotic swirl of emotions she couldn't name. Anger, yes. Humiliation, absolutely. But underneath those familiar feelings was something else, something that felt like the hairline crack in a dam just before it breaks. She thought about his words. Exhausted, worn down, running so hard she'd forgotten why she started. It was uncomfortably accurate. When was the last time she had taken a real vacation? When was the last time she had spent an evening doing something purely for enjoyment? When was the last time she had called her sister, who she hadn't spoken to in over a year after a fight she could barely remember? Her entire life had become a relentless pursuit of more. More success, more money, more properties, more recognition. She had told herself it was because she was ambitious, because she was driven. But sitting here now in the aftermath of David Thornton's quiet devastation, she wondered if maybe she had just been running away, running from the poverty of her childhood, running from the memory of her mother working 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, running from the fear that if she slowed down even for a moment, she would end up right back where she started. The intercom buzzed, making her jump. Miss Crawford? Jennifer's voice was tentative. The marketing team is here for your 10 o'clock meeting. Vanessa looked at her watch. She had been sitting there, lost in thought, for nearly an hour. Cancel it, she said. Cancel all my meetings for today. There was a pause. All of them, Miss Crawford. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Vanessa lied. Just tell them something came up. Reschedule everything for next week. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and walked to the window. 42 floors below, the city sprawled out in every direction. Somewhere down there, real homeless people were waking up on benches or in doorways, facing another day of invisibility and struggle. She had thought of them, when she thought of them at all, as failures, as people who had made bad choices or lacked the strength to succeed. But what if they were just people who had run out of options? What if they were fathers who had lost their jobs, mothers fleeing abusive relationships, veterans with mental illnesses that the system had failed to treat? What if they were human beings who deserved the same basic respect and dignity as anyone else? The thought was uncomfortable, challenging everything she had believed about the world and her place in it. It was easier to see them as other, as fundamentally different from her. Because if they weren't different, if they were just 1 or 2 pieces of bad luck away from where she was, then her success wasn't entirely earned. Then her judgment of them wasn't justified. Then her cruelty this morning wasn't just a momentary lapse, but a reflection of something broken in her own character. Vanessa pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She felt like she was seeing herself clearly for the first time in years and didn't like what she saw. She saw a woman who had become so obsessed with success that she had forgotten what success was supposed to be for. She had money, yes, power, certain respect, at least in professional circles, but she had no real friend, no meaningful relationships, no joy. She had built an empire but lost herself in the process. Her phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through her thoughts. She ignored it. It rang again. and again. Finally, she picked it up. "What?" she snapped. "Miss Crawford, it's Marcus from security. I just wanted to let you know that we've increased monitoring at all entrances. That situation this morning won't happen again." Vanessa closed her eyes. That situation. He meant David. He meant a human being who she had treated like refuse. "Marcus," she said slowly. "That man this morning, did you see where he went after he left?" Yes, ma'am." He pushed his cart down to the corner and then got into a black sedan that was waiting for him. "Looked like an expensive car, actually. We thought it was weird at the time." "I'm sure you did," Vanessa murmured. "Thank you, Marcus." "And Marcus?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry I yelled at you earlier. It wasn't your fault." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Oh, well, thank you, Miss Crawford. That's very kind of you to say." She hung up and returned to staring out the window. An apology. Such a simple thing, just a handful of words, and yet she couldn't remember the last time she had offered one. She thought about David Thornton, methodically planning his elaborate test, getting into costume, arranging for the cart, positioning himself in the lobby at precisely the right time. It must have taken significant effort, which meant this wasn't just a casual experiment. He had wanted to prove something specific. He had wanted to expose something specific, and he had succeeded. Vanessa didn't leave her office for the rest of the morning. She sat at her desk, pretending to work, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying the encounter in the lobby, seeing it now through different eyes. The way that man David had flinched when she screamed at him, the resignation in his shoulders as he shuffled toward the door, the small crowd of employees who had witnessed the entire humiliating spectacle. How many of them had gone back to their desks and whispered about what they'd seen? How many had felt a mixture of pity and disgust, not for the homeless man, but for her? She pulled up her email and began scrolling through the hundreds of messages that demanded her attention. Acquisitions to approve, contracts to review, complaints to address. The endless machinery of business that never stopped, never slowed, never gave her a moment to breathe. She realized that David had been right. She was exhausted, not the kind of tired that a good night's sleep could fix, but the kind of exhaustion that had seeped into her bones and settled there like a permanent resident. At noon, Jennifer knocked softly on the door and entered with a salad from the expensive bistro downstairs. "You didn't eat breakfast, Miss Crawford," she said gently. "I thought you should have something." Vanessa looked at the salad, the perfectly arranged greens and grilled chicken, and felt a wave of nausea. Jennifer," she said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, Miss Crawford." Jennifer set the salad on the desk and waited, her expression cautious. "Do you like working here?" Vanessa asked. "Be honest." Jennifer's eyes widened. Well, yes, it's a good job. Good benefits. The pay is excellent." "That's not what I asked," Vanessa pressed. "I asked if you like it. Do you enjoy coming to work every day? Do you feel valued, appreciated?" The younger woman shifted uncomfortably. "I think," she began carefully, "that working for you is challenging. You have very high standards, but I've learned a lot." It was a diplomatic answer, the kind of response that said everything by saying nothing at all. Vanessa sighed. "You can speak freely, Jennifer. I'm not going to fire you for being honest." Jennifer bit her lip, clearly wrestling with whether to believe that statement. After a long moment, she spoke. "You're brilliant, Miss Crawford. Everyone knows that. You built this company into something incredible." But sometimes she hesitated, searching for the right words. "Sometimes it feels like nothing is ever good enough. Like no matter how hard we work, we're always one mistake away from being dismissed. Not fired necessarily, but dismissed. Like we don't matter." The words landed heavily in the quiet office. Vanessa felt that uncomfortable twisting in her chest again, that unfamiliar sensation of shame mixed with something that might have been grief. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being honest. I know that wasn't easy." Jennifer nodded, still looking uncertain. "Is there anything else you need, Miss Crawford?" "Just one more thing," Vanessa said. "The new CFO, Mr. Thornton. What's your impression of him so far?" A small smile crossed Jennifer's face, the first genuine expression Vanessa had seen from her in months. "He's interesting," she said. "When he arrived this morning before his meeting with you, he stopped at my desk and introduced himself, asked my name, how long I'd been working here, if I enjoyed it. He actually seemed interested in the answer. Then he went around to the other assistants and the mailroom staff and did the same thing." People were, she paused, confused. "We're not used to executives treating us like people." The observation stung, but Vanessa forced herself to absorb it rather than deflect it. "Thank you, Jennifer," she said. "You can go." After Jennifer left, Vanessa sat with those words. We're not used to executives treating us like people. She had created that culture. She had established the norm where junior staff were invisible, where their value was measured only by their productivity, where basic courtesy was seen as an unnecessary luxury. She had built a company that was efficient and profitable and utterly devoid of humanity. At 2 o'clock, she forced herself to leave her office and head to the conference room for the board meeting. The 8 board members were already seated around the long mahogany table. David Thornton was there as well, sitting calmly at one end with a folder of documents in front of him. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral and professional. No one looking at him would have any idea that just hours ago he had been dressed in rags, playing the role of society's cast-off. Vanessa took her seat at the head of the table, acutely aware of the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She wondered if any of them had heard about the incident in the lobby. The board chair, a silver-haired man named Robert Hendricks, cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he said. "David, welcome to your first board meeting. Why don't you give us your initial impressions of the company's financial position?" David stood, moving to the screen at the front of the room where he had prepared a presentation. Over the next 30 minutes, he methodically walked through the company's financials. His analysis was thorough, his insights sharp. He identified inefficiencies Vanessa hadn't noticed, opportunities the previous CFO had missed. He spoke with the confidence of someone who knew his material intimately, but without the arrogance that so many executives wore like armor. The board members listened with increasing attention, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When he finished, Robert Hendricks leaned back in his chair with an approving smile. "Excellent work, David. Exactly the kind of analysis we were hoping for when we brought you on board. Now, before we move to the next item on the agenda, I understand there was an unusual incident in the lobby this morning." David's eyes flicked to Vanessa, just for a moment before returning to the board chair. "I assume you're referring to my arrival," he said evenly. "Yes, that was part of an assessment methodology I employ when joining a new organization. I find it valuable to observe company culture from an outside perspective." Robert frowned. "I'm not sure I understand. You pretended to be homeless?" David nodded. "I did. It's a practice I've used in my last 3 positions. It provides insights that are difficult to obtain through conventional means. For example, I learned that Crawford Industries has excellent security protocols, a competent reception staff, and a CEO who is deeply protective of the company's image and standard." The way he phrased it made it sound like a compliment, but Vanessa heard the undercurrent. He was giving her an opportunity to save face in front of the board. Another board member, a woman named Patricia Chun, spoke up. "That's certainly an unorthodox approach. Did anyone know you were planning this?" "No," David said simply. "The effectiveness of the exercise depends on genuine reactions. If people know they're being observed, they modify their behavior. I needed to see the truth." "And what truth did you see?" Patricia asked, her sharp eyes moving between David and Vanessa. David was quiet for a moment and Vanessa held her breath. "I saw a company with strong bones," he said finally. "Good systems, talented people, solid financial fundamentals. I also saw areas where improvements could be made, particularly around company culture and employee engagement, but those are issues we can address moving forward. I'm confident that with the right strategies, Crawford Industries can become not just profitable, but exemplary." It was a masterful response. Truthful enough to maintain his integrity, but diplomatic enough not to humiliate her in front of the board. The meeting continued for another hour, covering various agenda items, but Vanessa barely heard any of it. Her mind was stuck on David's words, areas where improvements could be made. It was such a gentle way of describing what he had witnessed, such a professional veneer over the ugly reality of her behavior. When the meeting finally ended, the board members filed out, several stopping to shake David's hand and welcome the team. Vanessa gathered her papers slowly, waiting for the room to empty. David was the last to leave. He had packed up his materials and was heading for the door when Vanessa spoke. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He turned back, his expression questioned. "In the lobby? I mean, why did you really do it?" He considered the question for a long moment. "Because I learned a long time ago that how a company treats its most vulnerable employees and visitors is a direct reflection of its leadership, and I wanted to know what kind of leader I would be working for. And now you know," Vanessa said bitterly. "Now you know exactly what kind of person I am." David walked back toward her, stopping a few feet away. "With respect, Miss Crawford, I don't think I do. I know what kind of person you were in one moment of stress and surprise, but I don't know if that's who you actually are or just who you've become. There's a difference." She looked up at him, searching his face for judgment, for condemnation, but she didn't find it. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like understanding. "Why didn't you tell the board what really happened?" she asked. "Why did you make it sound like it was no big deal?" "Because I don't believe in public humiliation," he said simply. "I believe in accountability, yes, and an honest assessment, but destroying someone's reputation doesn't make them better. It just makes them defensive." He moved toward the door again, then paused. "Besides," he added, "I think you're doing a fine job of holding yourself accountable without any help from me." That evening, Vanessa did something she hadn't done in years. Instead of working until 9 or 10 o'clock, she left the office at 5:30. The sun was still up, casting long golden shadows across the city streets. She walked instead of calling her driver, moving through the familiar downtown blocks with new eyes. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The newspaper vendor on the corner who called out headlines in a hoarse voice. The young mother struggling with a stroller and 2 shopping bags, no one stopping to help. The elderly man sitting on a bench feeding pigeons, completely alone in a sea of rushing commuters. And she noticed the homeless. They were everywhere once she actually looked. A woman wrapped in a dirty blanket sitting against the wall of a bank with a cardboard sign. A man rifling through a trash can, pulling out half-eaten food. A teenager who couldn't have been more than 19 with a backpack and hopeless eyes, asking passersby for spare change. Vanessa had walked these streets 1,000 times and never really seen any of them. They had been part of the background, urban furniture as invisible as fire hydrants or parking meters. She stopped in front of the woman with the cardboard sign. The woman looked up, her face weathered and lined with a hard life. The sign read, "Homeless veteran. Anything helps. God bless." Vanessa reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She had $300 in cash, money she kept for emergencies that never seemed to come. She pulled out all of it and handed it to the woman. The woman's eyes went wide with shock. "Ma'am, this is too much." "No," Vanessa said quietly, "it's not nearly enough, but it's a start." She walked away before the woman could respond, her heart pounding. It wasn't about the money. $300 was nothing to her, less than she spent on a single business lunch. But the act of seeing the woman, of acknowledging her existence, of treating her like a human being worthy of dignity, That meant something. It was a small crack in the wall Vanessa had built around herself, and through that crack, light was beginning to seep in. When she got home to her penthouse apartment, the space felt even more empty than usual. It was beautifully decorated, of course, all modern furniture and expensive art, but it had no warmth, no personality. It looked like a showroom, a place designed to impress rather than to live in. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the window, looking out over the city. Somewhere down there, David Thornton was probably at home, perhaps reviewing files or preparing for tomorrow. She wondered what his home looked like. She wondered if he had family, friends, a life beyond the office. She realized she knew almost nothing about him beyond his impressive resume. Her phone rang. It was her sister, Claire. Vanessa almost didn't answer. They hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since their mother's funeral, when they'd had a bitter argument about the estate. Claire had accused Vanessa of caring more about money than family. Vanessa had accused Claire of being jealous of her success. They had both said cruel things, unforgivable things, and then simply stopped talking. But tonight, with David's words still echoing in her mind, Vanessa hit the answer button. "Claire?" she said, her voice uncertain. "Vanessa," there was surprise in her sister's voice. "I didn't think you'd pick up." "I almost didn't," Vanessa admitted. There was a long pause. "Look," Claire finally said, "I know we haven't talked in a while and I know things ended badly, but I'm calling because I've been thinking about you. About us. About how stupid it is that we let money come between us when we're the only family each other has left." Vanessa felt tears prickling at her eyes. An unfamiliar sensation. "I've been thinking about that too," she said. "About a lot of things, actually." They talked for over an hour. Really talked. Not the superficial exchanges they'd had even before the falling out, but deep, honest conversation. Claire told her about her life, her job as a social worker, her recent divorce, her struggles and small victories. Vanessa found herself sharing things she never shared with anyone. Her loneliness, her exhaustion, her growing feeling that she had won every battle but lost the war. When they finally hung up with plans to have dinner the following week, Vanessa felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope for a business deal or a successful acquisition, but hope for connection, for redemption, for the possibility that she could change. The next morning, Vanessa arrived at the office early. She had made a decision during her sleepless night. A decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She was going to change, not just her behavior, but the entire culture of Crawford Industries, and she was going to need help to do it. She found David in his new office on the 41st floor, already at his desk despite the early hour. He looked up when she knocked, surprise flickering across his features. "Miss Crawford," he said, standing. "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right? Can I come in?" she asked. He gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. Vanessa sat down, suddenly feeling nervous. She had faced down hostile investors, ruthless competitors, and aggressive journalists without breaking a sweat. But this conversation felt harder than all of those combined. "I need your help," she said without preamble. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about the kind of leader I am versus the kind of leader I want to be. And I've realized that I don't actually know how to be better. I've spent so long being one way that I don't know how to be another." David leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's a brave admission," he said. "Most people in your position would never acknowledge that kind of vulnerability." "I'm tired of being brave in the wrong ways," Vanessa said. "I'm tired of fighting battles that don't matter and ignoring the things that do. So I'm asking you, as someone who clearly sees things I've been blind to, help me change this company. Help me change myself." David was quiet for a long moment. "What exactly are you asking for?" he said finally. "I want to implement a culture change initiative," Vanessa said, the words coming faster now as the idea took shape. "Not some superficial corporate PR thing, but real change. I want to understand why employee morale is low. I want to know why turnover is so high in certain departments. I want to fix the things that are broke, especially if I'm the one who broke, and I want you to lead it." David raised an eyebrow. "I'm your CFO, not your HR director." "I know," Vanessa said, "but you're also someone who understands that the health of a company isn't just about the balance sheet. You proved that yesterday, and frankly, you're the only person in this building who I trust to be honest with me." "That's because I don't work for you in the traditional sense," David said. "I work for the board. My loyalty is to the company's long-term health, not to making you good," Vanessa said. "That's exactly why you're the right person." She leaned forward. "Look, I know I can't undo what happened yesterday. I can't take back the things I said or the way I treated you, but I can try to make sure it never happens again, not just with me, but with anyone in this organization. Isn't that worth something?" David studied her for a long moment, and she felt like he was looking past her professional facade to the raw, uncertain person underneath. "All right," he said finally. "I'll help you, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, this can't be performative. You can't do this for PR or because you're worried about your reputation. You have to actually mean it." "I do," Vanessa said. "I mean it." "Second," David continued, "you have to be willing to hear hard truths. About the company, about your leadership, about yourself. And you can't get defensive or angry when you hear them." "Agreed." "Third, and this is the most important one, you have to be willing to change not just policies, but yourself. That means apologizing when you're wrong. That means admitting when you don't have all the answers. That means treating every person in this building, from the executive suite to the maintenance crew, with respect and dignity. Always." Vanessa swallowed hard. Those were not small conditions. They required her to dismantle the protective armor she had spent decades building, but sitting there in David's office, remembering the resigned shuffle of his shoulders as she had screamed at him to leave, she knew she had no choice. Agreed, she said. All of it. David's first recommendation came the same afternoon. He appeared at Vanessa's office door with a single sheet of paper in his hand. His expression was serious, almost grim, in a way that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "We need to start with the people who witnessed the incident," he said without preamble. The security guard, the receptionist, the employees who were in the lobby, they need to hear from you directly. An apology face-to-face, not through email or some corporate memo. Vanessa felt her throat constrict. The idea of confronting those people, of acknowledging what they had seen, made her want to retreat back into her office and lock the door. But she had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. "When?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Now," David said. "The longer you wait, the harder it becomes." Vanessa stood up, straightening her jacket. "All right," she said. "Let's do it." They started with Marcus, the security guard. He was at his post in the lobby, looking surprised and wary when he saw the CEO approaching with the new CFO at her side. "Marcus," Vanessa said, her voice softer than he had probably ever heard it. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course, Miss Crawford," he said, immediately straightening to attention. "What do you need?" "I need to apologize," Vanessa said. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like speaking a language she had never learned properly. "For yesterday morning, for yelling at you when none of what happened was your fault. I was out of line, and I'm sorry." Marcus stared at her, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like relief. Thank you, Miss Crawford," he stammered. "That's very professional of you." "It's not about being professional," Vanessa said. "It's about being fair. You were doing your job, and I made you feel like you weren't. That was wrong." She paused, then added, "I'd also like to know if there's anything you need to do your job better. Equipment, support, anything at all." Marcus blinked several times, clearly struggling to process this new version of his boss. "Well," he said carefully, "we could use another guard during peak hours. It gets pretty hectic in the mornings, and sometimes things slip through because we're spread thin." "Consider it done," Vanessa said. "Work with HR to bring someone else on board. Whatever you need." Marcus nodded, a small smile breaking through his professional demeanor. "Thank you, Miss Crawford. I appreciate that." As they walked away, David gave her an approving nod. "That was good," he said quietly. "Now the hard one." Kelly, the receptionist, was at her desk, her fingers flying over her keyboard. She looked up when Vanessa approached, and immediately her expression became guarded. The young woman had been in the direct line of fire during yesterday's outburst, close enough to feel the heat of Vanessa's rage. "Kelly," Vanessa said, and was alarmed to hear her own voice shaking slightly. "Can we talk for a moment?" The receptionist glanced nervously at David, then back at Vanessa. "Of course, Miss Crawford. Am I in trouble?" "No," Vanessa said quickly. "You're not in trouble. I am. I wanted to apologize for what you witnessed yesterday. The way I spoke, the things I said, they were completely unacceptable. You shouldn't have to see your CEO behaving that way, and I'm truly sorry you did." Kelly's carefully maintained professional mask cracked slightly. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. She hesitated. "It was pretty intense." "I know," Vanessa said. "And I want you to know that I'm working on being better. Not just saying I will be, but actually doing the work to change. If you ever see me slipping back into that behavior, I want you to feel comfortable calling me on it." Kelly's eyes widened. "You want me to call you out? If I think you're being unfair?" "If you think I'm being unfair," Vanessa corrected. "There's no thinking about it. If I am, you should absolutely say something. Can't fix problems I don't know exist." The young woman nodded slowly, though Vanessa could see the skepticism in her eyes. It would take more than one apology to rebuild that trust, but it was a start. "Thank you, Miss Crawford," Kelly said. "That means a lot." Over the next hour, Vanessa and David tracked down the 6 other employees who had been in the lobby during the incident. Each apology was slightly different, tailored to the individual and their specific experience. But the core message was the same. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'm going to do better." Some people accepted the apology graciously. Others were more reserved, clearly waiting to see if this was genuine change or just damage control. Vanessa didn't blame them for their skepticism. She had spent years earning their distrust. It would take time to earn anything else. When the last apology was complete, Vanessa felt emotionally exhausted. It was only noon, but she felt like she had run a marathon. David suggested they grab lunch, not in her office or the executive dining room, but in the company cafeteria. Vanessa couldn't remember the last time she had eaten there. She had always viewed it as something for lower-level employees, not for executives. But when they walked in, carrying their trays like everyone else, she saw it with new eyes. It was actually quite nice, with large windows letting in natural light and a surprisingly varied menu. They sat at a table in the corner, and Vanessa picked at her salad, her appetite non-existent. "You did well today," David said, cutting into his sandwich. "I know that wasn't easy." "It was terrible," Vanessa admitted. "Every time I had to say the words, I felt like I was exposing myself, like I was admitting weakness." "It's not weakness," David said. "It's humanity. and it's something your employees need to see from you. For too long, you've been an untouchable figure, someone to fear, but not someone to connect with. That creates distance, and distance creates dysfunction. Vanessa nodded, thinking about all the times she had deliberately maintained that distance. The times she had walked past people without acknowledging them. The meetings where she had spoken but never really listened. The evaluations where she had criticized but never praised. She had thought she was being strong, professional, effective, but she had just been alone. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why did you really take this job? Your resume is impressive. You could have gone anywhere. Why here?" David set down his sandwich and met her eyes. "Honestly, because I saw potential for real change. I've worked at a lot of companies, Miss Crawford. Most of them have problems. Bad leadership, toxic culture, poor ethics, but most of them are too far gone to save. The rot goes too deep, and the people in charge don't want to acknowledge it, let alone fix it." He leaned back in his chair. "But when I researched Crawford Industries, I saw something different. I saw a company with good bones that had just lost its way. And I saw a leader who, despite her flaws, had the intelligence and drive to turn things around if someone could just get through to her. So you became homeless," Vanessa said. "That was your way of getting through to me." David smiled slightly. "It was the only way I could think of to cut through all the corporate politeness and professional distance. I needed to see who you really were when you thought no one important was watching. And I needed you to see it too." "And what did you see?" Vanessa asked, not sure she wanted the answer. "I saw someone who had forgotten why she started this company in the first place," he said simply. "Someone who had been running for so long that she had forgotten she could stop. Someone who was succeeding by every external measure but failing at the things that actually matter." The words stung, but Vanessa didn't flinch away from them. "You're right," she said. "When I started this company, it was because I wanted to prove that someone like me, someone from nothing, could build something that mattered. I wanted to create opportunities for other people but somewhere along the way it stopped being about opportunities and started being about conquest, about winning for the sake of winning." She pushed her salad away, her appetite completely gone. "I lost sight of the why, then find it again," David said. "Says that's what this culture change initiative is really about. It's not just about making employees happier or improving retention numbers, though. Those are good things. It's about reconnecting with your original purpose. It's about building a company that doesn't just make money but makes a difference." Vanessa felt something stirring in her chest, something that felt almost like excitement. For the first time in years, she felt like she was working towards something meaningful rather than just running away from something painful. "Okay," she said, "where do we start?" David pulled out his phone and opened a document. "I've been working on a preliminary plan. First, we need to conduct a comprehensive culture audit, anonymous surveys, focus groups, one-on-one interviews. We need to understand the full scope of the problems before we can address them. Second, we need to look at leadership training, starting with you and extending to every manager in the company. And third, we need to establish new values and actually live by them, not just put them on a poster in the break room." The culture audit results arrived 2 weeks later, and they were devastating. Vanessa sat in the conference room with David and the external consulting firm they had hired, staring at the data projected on the screen. Employee satisfaction scores were in the bottom 10th percentile compared to similar companies. 73% of employees reported feeling undervalued. 68% said they didn't trust senior leadership. The comments from the anonymous surveys were even worse. "Management treats us like machines, not people. I'm afraid to speak up because I'll be punished. The CEO is brilliant but terrifying. I've seen her make grown men cry." Vanessa felt each criticism like a physical blow. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had only been trying to maintain standards, to push people to excellence. But David had warned her about defensiveness, and she bit back the excuses forming on her lips. "This is who I've been," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "This is the legacy I've created." The consultant, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, looked at her with what might have been sympathy. "The good news," she said, "is that awareness is the first step toward change. And the fact that you commissioned this audit shows you're serious about transformation. The bad news is that rebuilding trust takes time, years, potentially, and it requires consistent, sustained effort." "I understand," Vanessa said. "What do we need to do?" Dr. Martinez clicked to the next slide. "We recommend a multi-phase approach. Phase 1 is leadership development, specifically for you and your executive team. You need to learn new management styles, new communication techniques, new ways of relating to employees. Phase 2 is structural changes. Some of your policies and procedures actively work against a healthy culture. We'll need to identify and revise those. Phase 3 is community build. Your employees need opportunities to connect with each other and with leadership in low-stakes, authentic ways." Over the following weeks, Vanessa threw herself into the work with the same intensity she had once reserved for acquisitions and quarterly earning. She attended workshops on emotional intelligence and empathetic leadership. She read books with titles like Leaders Eat Last and Dare to Lead. She practiced active listening techniques and learned to ask questions instead of giving orders. It was humbling work, made harder by the fact that she was essentially teaching herself to be a different person. The old Vanessa had been confident, certain, always in control. The new Vanessa was uncertain, vulnerable, constantly questioning whether she was doing things right. David became her unofficial coach, meeting with her several times a week to process what she was learning and how to apply it. They would sit in his office or sometimes in the cafeteria, and he would role-play difficult conversations with her, pointing out when she slipped back into her old patterns. "You're doing it again," he would say gently when she started giving orders instead of asking for input. "Listen to your tone. What are you actually communicating?" Vanessa would pause, reflect, and try again. It was exhausting and frustrating, like learning to write with her non-dominant hand. But slowly, incrementally, things began to change. Vanessa started doing something she called walkabouts every day. She would spend 30 minutes walking through different departments, not to check on work or catch mistakes, but simply to be present and available. She would stop at people's desks and ask how they were doing, what challenges they were facing, what ideas they had. At first, people were suspicious, giving careful, guarded responses. But as the weeks passed and she kept showing up, kept listening, kept actually implementing the suggestions people made, the walls began to come down. She learned that the marketing team desperately needed updated software but had been afraid to ask for budget. She approved it immediately. She learned that the janitorial staff started work at 4 in the morning, but there was no coffee available that early, so she arranged for the cafeteria to open earlier. She learned that several employees were caring for elderly parents and struggling with the rigid 9-to-5 schedule, so she implemented flexible work hours. Each change was small individually, but collectively they sent a message. Your needs matter. Your voices are heard. You are valued. One morning, about 6 weeks into the transformation process, Vanessa arrived to find a young man from the IT department waiting nervously outside her office. His name was James, and she recognized him from her walkabouts. He was the one who had suggested the software upgrade for marketing. "Miss Crawford," he said, fidgeting with his employee badge. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course," Vanessa said, unlocking her office door. "Come in." They sat down and James took a deep breath. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for actually listening to us, for making changes. A lot of us, we didn't think it was real at first. We thought it was just PR, you know? But you've actually followed through on everything you said you'd do." Vanessa felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. "Thank you for saying that, James. It means a lot." James nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else," he said, "something I think you should know. A few of us have been talking, and we wanted you to hear this directly from employees, not just from consultants or surveys. We know you're trying to change, and we respect that. But there are still some managers who haven't gotten the message. They're still running their departments the old way, creating fear instead of trust. And people are afraid to report it because they don't want to be seen as troublemakers." Vanessa leaned forward, her attention completely focused. "Tell me who and tell me what's happening. I promise you won't face any consequences for being honest. In fact, you'll be helping me make this company better." James pulled out his phone and opened a notes app where he had clearly been documenting incidents. Over the next 20 minutes, he walked her through a pattern of toxic behavior from 2 specific managers, verbal abuse disguised as tough love, unrealistic deadlines set as punishment, public humiliation in meetings, taking credit for subordinates' work. It was everything Vanessa had been doing, but she had stopped. These managers hadn't. When James finished, Vanessa felt a familiar anger rising in her chest. But this time it wasn't directed at someone she perceived as weak or failing. It was directed at people who were abusing their power, who were perpetuating the very culture she was trying to dismantle. "Thank you, James," she said, "for trusting me with this. I'm going to handle it, and I'm going to handle it today. You have my word." After James left, she immediately called David and the head of HR into her office. She explained the situation, showed them James's documentation, and asked for their recommendation. David's expression was grim. "You know what needs to happen," he said. "They need to be let go. You can't have managers actively undermining the culture change. It sends the message that the new values are optional, that people can choose whether or not to participate." Vanessa nodded. She had known that would be the answer, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach clench. These were longtime employees, people who had been with the company for years, but they were also people who were actively harming others. The choice was clear. "Set up meetings with both of them for this afternoon," she told HR. "I'll handle the conversations personally." The terminations were some of the hardest conversations Vanessa had ever had. Both managers were shocked, defensive, arguing that they were just maintaining standards and pushing for excellence. "That's what I used to say too," Vanessa told them, "but excellence doesn't require cruelty. Leadership doesn't require fear. I know that now, and I need everyone in this company to know it too. If you can't lead with respect and dignity, then you can't lead here anymore." She offered them generous severance packages and outplacement services, but she was firm. Their time at Crawford Industries was over. Word spread quickly through the company. The CEO had fired 2 managers for toxic behavior. People who had seemed untouchable were gone. And the message was clear. The culture change wasn't performative. It wasn't temporary. It was real, and there would be consequences for those who refused to embrace it. Vanessa saw the shift in people's eyes during her walkabouts. The wariness was still there, but it was mixed now with something that looked like cautious hope. Maybe this really was different. Maybe things really were changing. That evening, Vanessa was the last one in the office, but instead of working, she was standing at her window watching the sun set over the city. She thought about the journey she had been on over the past 2 months, the humiliation of David's test, the painful self-reflection, the awkward apologies, the exhausting work of learning to be better. She thought about the employees whose lives she had made harder through her callousness and about the people she was now trying to help. She thought about James, brave enough to speak truth to power, and she thought about David, who had seen past her worst moment to the person she could become. 3 months into the transformation, Vanessa implemented what David called radical transparency. Every quarter, she would hold an all-hands meeting where she would share not just the company's financial performance, but also the challenges they were facing, the mistakes leadership had made, and the lessons they were learning. The first such meeting was terrifying. Standing on a stage in front of 300 employees, Vanessa felt more exposed than she ever had in any boardroom negotiation. But she had committed to authenticity, and authenticity meant vulnerability. "I want to start by acknowledging something," she began, her voice carrying through the auditorium. "3 months ago, I was not the leader this company needed. I was demanding without being supportive. I was critical without being constructive. I created an environment where people were afraid to make mistakes, which meant they were afraid to innovate, to take risks, to bring their whole selves to work. And I'm sorry for that." She paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. Some people looked skeptical, some looked surprised, but most looked curious, leaning forward to hear what she would say next. "I can't change the past," Vanessa continued, "but I can commit to doing better going forward, and I can share with you what that looks like in practical terms. Over the past quarter, we've implemented flexible work schedules, upgraded outdated equipment, and increased budget for professional development. We've terminated managers who refuse to embrace our new values, and we've promoted people who exemplify the kind of leadership we want to see. But we've also made mistakes." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a graph of declining productivity in one department. "This team's output dropped by 15% after we changed their workflow system without adequately training them on the new process. That was a failure of leadership, my failure, and we're working to correct it." The honesty was startling. Employees were used to management's spin, to carefully crafted messages that made everything sound positive and under control. They weren't used to a CEO admitting mistakes publicly. As Vanessa continued through her presentation, showing both successes and failures, she could feel the energy in the room shifting. People were engaged, asking questions, offering suggestions. It wasn't the tense, fearful atmosphere of previous all-hands meeting. It was something closer to collaboration. After the meeting, dozens of employees approached her wanting to talk, to share their own experiences, to offer ideas. Vanessa stayed for 2 hours, long past when she had planned to leave, because these conversations felt important. One woman from accounting told her that she had been planning to quit but had decided to stay because she finally felt like her voice mattered. A man from operations said that his team had been working on an efficiency improvement but had been too afraid to propose it because they thought management would dismiss it. Vanessa scheduled a meeting with them for the following week. David found her later that evening, still in the empty auditorium, staring at the stage where she had stood. "That was remarkable," he said quietly, sitting down in the seat next to her. "I've seen a lot of corporate transformations, but I've never seen a CEO lay themselves bare like that." "It felt like the right thing to do," Vanessa said. "Like the only honest thing to do." She turned to look at him. "Thank you, by the way. For everything. For seeing something in me worth saving." David met her gaze, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "You saved yourself," he said. "I just pointed you in the right direction." Over the following weeks, Vanessa noticed that her relationship with David was shifting. They had started as adversaries, moved to collaborators, and now there was something else developing. A friendship, perhaps, though it felt like more than that. They spent hours together working on culture initiatives, yes, but also just talking about their lives, their fears, their hopes. She learned that he had grown up in poverty too, that he had put himself through college working 3 jobs, that he had nearly given up a dozen times but kept pushing through. She learned that his unorthodox approach to consulting had cost him positions at more traditional firms, but that he refused to compromise his methods. One evening, they were working late in her office, reviewing employee feedback forms. David was sitting on the couch rather than in one of the formal chairs, his tie loosened, his usual professional demeanor relaxed. Vanessa had kicked off her heels and was sitting cross-legged in her desk chair, something she never would have done 3 months ago. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. David looked up from the form he was reading. "Of course. Why did you really do the homeless test? I mean, I understand the official reason, the culture assessment, but it felt like more than that. Like you were testing something specific about me." David set down the paper and was quiet for a long moment. "Because I wanted to see if you had empathy," he said finally. "Not corporate empathy where you care about employees because they drive productivity. Real empathy. The kind that sees another human being suffering and feels compelled to help even when there's nothing to gain from it." He looked at her directly. "And honestly, based on your reputation, I wasn't sure you had it. I thought there was a chance you were too far gone, that the years of cutthroat business had hardened you beyond repair. And if that was true, I wouldn't have taken the job." Vanessa felt her chest tighten. "And what did you conclude?" "That you failed the test spectacularly," David said with a slight smile. "But you failed it in a way that showed me something important. You weren't indifferent to the homeless man. You were actively angry, disgusted, emotional, which meant you were still capable of feeling something. You had just been directing those feelings in destructive rather than constructive ways. And I thought, maybe that could be redirected." Vanessa absorbed this, understanding for the first time the full calculation behind his elaborate performance. "You took a huge risk," she said. "What if I had been different? What if I'd been kind to the homeless man but still a terrible leader? Then I would have learned something different about you, he said simply. The test wasn't about getting one specific result, it was about seeing your truth. And now that I've seen it, now that you've seen it, we can work with it. Vanessa stood up and walked to the window, her usual spot for difficult reflections. I used to think empathy was weakness, she said quietly. In business, I mean. I thought if you cared too much about people's feelings, they would take advantage of you. They would see you as soft and lose respect. It's what I told myself to justify the way I treated. David came to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the glittering city. Empathy isn't weakness, he said. It's strength. It takes courage to be vulnerable, to acknowledge others' humanity, to admit when you're wrong. What you've been doing these past 3 months, the apologies, the changes, the transparent leadership, that's harder than anything you did before. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Vanessa found herself acutely aware of his presence, the way he seemed to radiate calm and steadiness. She realized that at some point over the past 3 months, he had become the person she trusted most in the world, the person whose opinion mattered more than any board member or investor, the person who made her want to be better, not because he demanded it, but because he believed she could be. Can I tell you something? She said. Always. I'm terrified, she admitted. Terrified that I'll slip back into old patterns, that one day I'll be stressed or angry and I'll say something cruel and all of this progress will be for nothing. That I'll prove everyone right who said people don't really change. David turned to face her fully. People don't change overnight, he said, and they don't change perfectly. You will make mistakes. You'll have bad days where you're short with people or make poor decisions. That's not failure, that's being human. The difference is what you do after. Do you acknowledge the mistake? Do you apologize? Do you learn from it? That's what separates transformation from performance. His hand was resting on the window frame, inches from hers. Vanessa felt an unexpected urge to reach out, to close that small distance, but she held back, uncertain and uncharacteristically hesitant. The moment was broken by her phone buzzing with an alert. She glanced at it and sighed. The board chair, she said, wants to schedule a meeting to discuss quarterly results. David stepped back, the professional distance returning. How do you think they'll react to everything we've been doing? Honestly, I don't know, Vanessa said. The culture changes cost money. The leadership training, the new equipment, the flexible schedules, all of it impacts the bottom line. And the board cares about the bottom line. But if we can show that employee satisfaction leads to better retention and productivity, which leads to better financial performance, they'll support it. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and Vanessa spent the weekend preparing her presentation with David. They worked from her apartment, which felt somehow more intimate than meeting at the office. David had brought his laptop and a folder of financial reports, and they spread everything across her dining room table. Vanessa ordered takeout from the Thai place down the street, and they worked through dinner, analyzing data and crafting arguments. The numbers were encouraging. Employee turnover had dropped by 22%. Sick days had decreased. Several key projects that had been stalled for months were suddenly moving forward as teams felt more empowered to make decisions without fear of reprisal. But the financial impact wasn't dramatic yet. The culture changes had cost approximately $2 million in the first quarter, and while productivity was improving, it hadn't yet translated to significant revenue increases. The board would want to see return on investment, and Vanessa wasn't sure she could give them the metrics they wanted. What if they don't care about employee satisfaction? She said, staring at a spreadsheet that showed marginal profit growth. What if all they care about is quarterly earnings, and they see this whole initiative as a waste of money? David looked up from his laptop. Then you remind them that you're the CEO. And you're making strategic decisions for the long-term health of the company, not just short-term profits. You remind them that the best companies in the world, the ones that sustain success for decades, are the ones that invest in their people. And if they still don't buy it, you tell them to look at the data on what toxic culture costs. He pulled up another document. Companies with high turnovers spend an average of 30% of an employee's salary to replace them. We're saving that money by keeping people. Companies with disengaged employees see productivity losses of up to 34%. We're recapturing that productivity. The ROI is there. It just takes time to show up in the numbers. Vanessa nodded, but the knot of anxiety in her stomach didn't loosen. She had always been so confident walking into board meetings armed with impressive acquisition deals or promising development projects. This felt different. She was asking them to trust her on something that couldn't be reduced to a simple profit and loss statement. She was asking them to believe in a vision of business that valued people as much as profits, and she wasn't sure they would. David must have seen the worry in her face because he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "You've got this," he said quietly. "You've come so far in 3 months. Don't doubt yourself now." The touch sent a jolt through Vanessa, an electric current of awareness. She looked down at their hands, his larger and warmer, covering hers completely. When she looked up, their eyes met, and she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. It wasn't just professional respect or friendly encouragement. It was something deeper, something that had been building between them over late nights and honest conversations and shared purpose. "David," she started, not sure what she was going to say. He withdrew his hand, breaking the moment. "Sorry," he said, though he didn't sound sorry. "That was unprofessional." "It wasn't," Vanessa said. Or maybe it was, but I didn't mind. They looked at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Vanessa felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown water. For 3 months, She had been learning to be vulnerable, to let people in, to risk connection, but this was different. This was personal in a way that terrified and thrilled her. "We should probably get back to work," David said finally, though he made no move to look away from her. "We should," Vanessa agreed, also not moving. The moment stretched, both of them frozen in the strange space between what was and what could be. Then Vanessa made a decision. She had spent 3 months learning to be brave in new ways. Time to be brave in this way too. "I don't want to get back to work," she said quietly. "I want to talk about what's happening here between us because something is happening and I think we both know it." David let out a slow breath. "You're my boss," he said. "And you're also someone who's in the middle of a major personal transformation. The last thing you need is the complication of a relationship, especially with someone you work with." "You're right," Vanessa said. "It's complicated. It's potentially messy. It could make things awkward if it doesn't work out. But I'm tired of making every decision based on what's safe or strategic or professionally optimal. For once, I want to make a decision based on what I actually feel. And what I feel is that you're the first person in a decade who has made me want to be better. Not for business reasons, but because you see something in me worth being better for." David's expression softened. "Vanessa," he said, and her name and his voice sounded different than when anyone else said it. Less formal, more intimate. "I took this job specifically because I thought you could change. But somewhere along the way, watching you do the hard work of transformation, I stopped seeing you as a project and started seeing you as..." He paused, searching for words. "As someone remarkable." Neither of them moved. The tension was almost unbearable, a taut wire ready to snap. Then David stood up, walked around the table, and held out his hand to her. Vanessa took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They stood close, closer than they ever had before, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "This is a terrible idea," he murmured, even as his other hand came up to cup her face. "The worst," she agreed, leaning into his touch. They kissed, and it was nothing like the careful, controlled interactions they usually had. It was messy and desperate and honest, 3 months of growing attraction finally finding release. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vanessa laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that felt like freedom. "What are we doing?" she asked. "I have no idea," David admitted, "but I don't want to stop." "Neither do I," Vanessa said. "But we need to be smart about this. We need to set boundaries. Keep it professional at work, make sure it doesn't compromise the culture work we're doing." "Agreed," David said. He kissed her again, softer this time. "But off the clock, I'm all in if you are." "I'm in," Vanessa said, terrified but in. They spent the rest of the weekend working on the presentation, but the dynamic between them had shifted. There were stolen glances and casual touches and moments of laughter that had nothing to do with business. Vanessa felt lighter than she had in years, as if some burden she'd been carrying had finally been set down. When David left Sunday evening, she stood at her door watching him walk to the elevator, and she felt something she hadn't felt since her 20s. Hope, not just for her company, but for herself, for the possibility of happiness, of partnership, of love. The board meeting on Tuesday started exactly as Vanessa had expected. Robert Hendricks opened with praise for the quarterly financial results, which were solid if not spectacular. Then he turned his attention to the culture initiative. "Vanessa," he said, his tone taking on a concerned edge, "the board has some questions about the investments you've been making in what you're calling culture transformation. We've reviewed the expenditures, and while we appreciate the goal, we're concerned about the cost. $2 million is a significant amount of money to spend on initiatives that don't have clear ROI. Vanessa glanced at David, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. She stood up, walked to the screen at the front of the room, and pulled up her presentation. "With respect, Robert," she said, her voice calm and confident, "I disagree that there's no clear ROI. Let me show you what we've achieved in just 3 months. She clicked through slides showing the reduction in turnover, the increase in employee engagement scores, the acceleration of previously stalled projects. She presented the data on what toxic culture costs companies and how Crawford Industries was avoiding those costs. She showed testimonials from employees about how the changes had impacted their work and their lives. But more than the data, she told stories. She told them about James, the IT employee who had been brave enough to speak up about toxic managers. She told them about the marketing team that had finally proposed an innovative campaign they'd been sitting on for a year because they'd been too afraid to share it. She told them about the night custodian who had approached her during a walkabout to say that in 5 years of working at Crawford Industries, it was the first time an executive had ever learned his name. These stories, she said, are about human beings, people who come to work every day and give us their time, their talent, their energy, people who have made this company successful, and for too long I took them for granted. I treated them as resources to be managed rather than people to be valued. The culture initiative isn't just about improving numbers, though it will do that. It's about being the kind of company that deserves the loyalty and dedication of good people." The room was silent after Vanessa finished speaking. She looked around the table at the 8 board members, trying to read their expression. Some looked thoughtful, some looked skeptical. Patricia Chun, the board member who had questioned David's methods months ago, finally spoke. "That's a compelling presentation, Vanessa," she said carefully. "But I think what concerns some of us is whether this represents a sustainable change or just a phase. You're asking us to trust that you've fundamentally changed your leadership approach, but leadership patterns are deeply ingrained. How do we know this isn't just temporary?" It was the question Vanessa had been dreading, the one that cut straight to the heart of her own fear. fears. She could have deflected, could have pointed to the data again, could have made promises about the future. Instead, she chose honesty. "You don't know," she said simply. "You can't know for certain because I can't prove the future. I can only show you what I've done over the past 3 months and ask you to trust that I'm committed to continuing that work. But I understand your skepticism. I've given you every reason to doubt me over the years." She walked back to her seat but remained standing, her hands resting on the chair back. "3 months ago, our CFO conducted a test. He came into this building dressed as a homeless man to see how he would be treated, and I failed that test spectacularly. I was cruel, dismissive, and inhumane. I screamed at a person I perceived as beneath me and threw him out of our building." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Most of them had heard rumors about the incident, but this was the first time Vanessa had addressed it directly. "That moment showed me who I had become," she said. "Someone who had achieved every professional goal but had lost her humanity in the process. Someone who measured worth by productivity and profit rather than by inherent human dignity. David Thornton gave me a gift that day, though it didn't feel like it at the time. He gave me the gift of seeing myself clearly, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't pretend anymore that my leadership style was just demanding or that my treatment of people was justified by results. I had to admit that I was causing harm, and I had to decide whether I was willing to do the work to change." Vanessa's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "I've spent 3 months doing that work. Learning to listen instead of lecture, learning to ask instead of order, learning to see employees as whole human beings rather than functions. And yes, it cost $2 million. But you want to know what it would have cost if we hadn't done it?" She pulled up one final slide. "This is what I project would have happened without the culture initiative," she said. "Based on our trajectory, we were looking at losing 35% of our workforce within the year. The cost of replacing those employees, of training new people, of lost productivity, of institutional knowledge walking out the door, would have been approximately $18 million. Not to mention the reputational damage when word got out that Crawford Industries was a toxic place to work. We wouldn't have been able to attract top talent. Our client relationships would have suffered. Our competitors would have used it against us." She let that sink in. $2 million to prevent $18 million in losses. That's not poor ROI. That's one of the smartest investments this company has ever made. Robert Hendricks leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You make a compelling argument," he said, "but Patricia's question stands. How do we ensure sustainability? What's your plan for maintaining this culture change over the long term?" David spoke up for the first time. "If I may," he said, "I've been working with Vanessa throughout this process, and I can tell you that sustainable change requires 3 things: ongoing accountability, continuous learning, and structural reinforcement. We've built all 3 into our plans moving forward." He outlined the systems they had designed: regular culture audits to catch problems early, mandatory leadership training for all managers, with culture metrics factored into performance reviews and compensation, employee feedback mechanisms that allowed people to raise concerns without fear of retaliation, and most importantly, modeling from the top. "The truth is," David said, looking directly at Vanessa, "your CEO is doing the hardest work I've ever seen a leader do. She's not just changing policies, she's changing herself. And that's not easy. It requires humility, courage, and a willingness to be uncomfortable every single day. But that's what real leadership looks like." Another board member, a man named Thomas Wu, raised his hand. "I have a question for you, David," he said. "You've consulted for a lot of companies. How does Crawford Industries compare in terms of the depth of the problems and the potential for successful transformation?" David didn't hesitate. "Honestly, 3 months ago, I would have said this was one of the most toxic cultures I'd encountered. The fear-based management, the lack of trust, the dehumanization of employees, it was severe. But today I'd say this is one of the most promising transformations I've been part of, because it's being led by someone who genuinely understands what she did wrong and is genuinely committed to being better." The board members exchanged glances. Finally, Robert stood up. "I think we need to deliberate privately," he said. "Vanessa, David, if you could give us the room for a few minutes." Vanessa and David stepped out into the hallway. The moment the door closed behind them, Vanessa sagged against the wall. "That was brutal," she said. "You did great," David assured her. "You were honest, passionate, and you backed everything up with data. That's all you can do." They waited in tense silence for 20 minutes that felt like hours. Finally, the door opened and Robert gestured for them to come back in. Vanessa returned to her seat, her heart pounding. "We've discussed your presentation," Robert said, his expression giving nothing away, "and we've reached a decision. The board recognizes the importance of company culture and the work you've been doing to address long-standing issues. We also recognize that these initiatives require investment and time to show full returns." There was a pause that felt like an eternity. "Therefore," Patricia continued, "we're approving the Culture Initiative budget for the next fiscal year, with the understanding that we'll review progress quarterly. We expect to see continued improvement in both culture metrics and financial performance. But we also want to commend you, Vanessa, for having the courage to address problems that many leaders ignored." Vanessa felt relief wash over her so powerfully that she thought she might cry. "Thank you," she managed. "I won't let you down." "We know you won't," Robert said, and for the first time in the meeting, he smiled. "Now let's move on to the next agenda item." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Vanessa heard herself responding responding to questions about various projects and initiatives. But her mind was still processing what had just happened. The board had approved her vision. They had trusted her. They had seen her transformation and believed in it. When the meeting finally ended, she walked back to her office in a daze. David followed, closing the door behind them. "We did it," he said simply. "You did it," Vanessa corrected. "You presented the vision, I just provided the frame." She shook her head. "We did it together. I couldn't have done any of this without you." She walked to her window, her familiar spot for reflection. "You know what's strange?" she said. "3 months ago, I thought success meant closing deals and growing revenue and proving I was the smartest person in the room. But standing there today talking about employee well-being and culture transformation, that felt more like success than anything I've achieved." "That's because it is success," David said, coming to stand beside her. "Real success, the kind that matters." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below. Vanessa thought about everything that had happened since that morning in the lobby. The humiliation, the self-reflection, the hard work of change. She thought about the apologies she had made and the relationships she had started to rebuild. She thought about James and Kelly and Marcus and all the other employees who had given her a second chance. And she thought about the man standing beside her who had believed she could change even when she hadn't believed it herself. "I'm not the same person I was 3 months ago," she said quietly. "No," David agreed. "You're better, but you're also still you. You still have that drive, that intelligence, that fierce determination. You've just learned to channel it in healthier ways." Vanessa turned to face him. "At work, we agreed to keep things professional," she said, "and we have been. But right now, in this moment, I just want to say thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for not giving up on me even when I gave you every reason to." David's expression softened. "You gave me reasons to stay too," he said. "Every time you chose vulnerability over ego. Every time you admitted you were wrong. Every time you showed up and did the work even when it was hard. That's when I stopped seeing you as a client and started seeing you as someone extraordinary." He reached out and took her hand, a simple gesture that felt monumental. "And for what it's worth," he added, "I'm grateful I took that job. I'm grateful I walked into that lobby dressed in rags. Because it led me here to this moment with you." 6 months after David's test, Vanessa stood in the lobby of Crawford Industries watching a very different scene unfold. A man had wandered in from the street, clearly unhoused, carrying a worn backpack and looking disoriented. But this time Marcus didn't rush to remove him. Instead, the security guard approached gently, asked if the man needed help, and offered to call a social services number. Kelly brought him a bottle of water and a granola bar from the reception desk. And when the man explained he was looking for the employment office down the street but had gotten lost, Marcus personally walked him there. Vanessa watched the entire interaction from the elevator bank, her heart full. This was the culture she had built, or rather rebuilt, one where compassion came before judgment, where humanity came before policy. She thought about the person she had been 6 months ago, the woman who had screamed at a vulnerable person to get out of her building. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone from another life. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and moments of regression, times when stress made her slip back into old patterns, when she spoke sharply or made decisions without consultation. But each time, she caught herself, apologized, corrected course, and slowly those moments became rarer. The employee satisfaction scores from the latest survey had arrived that morning. 87% of employees now reported feeling valued. Trust in leadership had climbed to 79%. Turnover was down by 42%, and productivity was up by 18%. The culture transformation was working, not just in making people happier, but in making the company stronger. The board had taken notice, praising Vanessa's leadership in the last quarterly meeting. But more meaningful than their praise were the small moments. The way employees now smiled when they saw her during walkabouts. The way people stopped her in the hallway to share ideas without fear. The thank you notes that appeared on her desk from team members who felt heard and appreciated for the first time. Vanessa's relationship with David had deepened over the months. They had been careful to maintain professional boundaries at work, but outside the office they had built something real and meaningful. He challenged her in ways no one else did, calling her out when she was wrong, but celebrating her victories with genuine joy. He had become her partner in every sense of the word, someone who saw all of her, the brilliant and the broken, the strong and the scared, and loved her anyway. They had talked about going public with their relationship, about what it would mean for the company, but they had decided to wait until the culture transformation was more firmly established, until it was clear that the changes were sustainable and not dependent on their partnership. One Saturday morning, Vanessa suggested they volunteer together at a homeless shelter downtown. David looked surprised. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I know that might be difficult given everything." "I'm sure," Vanessa said. "I need to face that part of myself, the part that judged people based on their circumstances. I need to actually help rather than just feeling guilty." The shelter was called Hope Haven, and it served breakfast to about 200 people every weekend. Vanessa and David arrived at 6 in the morning, put on aprons, and joined the line of volunteers serving food. The first person who came through was a woman about Vanessa's age with tired eyes and a baby on her hip. Vanessa spooned scrambled eggs onto her plate, and the woman smiled. "Thank you," she said. "God bless you for being here." Something cracked open in Vanessa's chest. Quote, this woman who had so little angel was blessing her. Over the next 3 hours, Vanessa served food to people from every walk of life: veterans with haunted eyes, families who had lost everything in a fire, young people who had aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Each person had a story, a history, a humanity that was invisible to people who rushed past them on the street. She thought about how easily she could have ended up here. A few bad breaks, a different childhood, a moment of catastrophic bad luck. The distance between her penthouse and this shelter was not as vast as she had once believed. It was just circumstance, just fortune, just grace. After the breakfast service ended, the shelter director, a warm woman named Rosa, approached them. "Thank you both for volunteering," she said. "We can always use more hands. Vanessa, I recognize you from the news. You're the CEO of Crawford Industries, right?" Vanessa nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "I am," Rosa smiled. "We've been trying to get corporate sponsors for our job training program. We help people develop skills and connect them with employment, but we need funding for materials and instructors. Would your company be interested in partnering with us?" Vanessa didn't hesitate. "Absolutely," she said. "Send me the details and I'll make sure it happens." She paused, then added, "And I'd like to volunteer here regularly if you'll have me. Not as a CEO, just as someone who wants to help." David squeezed her hand as they left the shelter. "That was beautiful," he said. "You didn't have to commit to volunteering." "I know I didn't have to," Vanessa said, "but I want to. I spent so long seeing homeless people as separate from me. I need to see them as neighbors, as fellow human beings. I need to remember what I almost became." They walked through the city hand in hand, and Vanessa felt a peace she had never experienced before. Success wasn't about how much money she made or how many properties she owned. Success was about the impact she had on people's lives, the kindness she showed, the dignity she afforded to everyone she encountered. 3 months later, Crawford Industries announced a new initiative. They would be hiring 10 formerly homeless individuals for entry-level positions with full benefits and support service. And the program included job training, housing assistance, and mentorship from senior employees. It was controversial. Some board members worried about liability and public perception. Some employees questioned whether it was appropriate. But Vanessa championed it fiercely, and with David's support and the data showing that such programs had high success rates, it was approved. The first person hired was a man named Marcus, no relation to their security guard. He'd been living in his car after losing his job during the pandemic. He came to his interview clean-shaven and nervous, wearing a suit from Goodwill. Vanessa interviewed him personally. "Tell me about yourself, Marcus," she said, her voice kind. "Well," he began hesitantly, "I know I don't have recent work experience. I know living in my car doesn't look good on a resume. But I'm a hard worker. I used to be a warehouse supervisor before everything fell apart. I just need a chance to prove myself again." Vanessa saw herself in him, not the powerful CEO version, but the scared young woman who had clawed her way up from poverty, the person who just needed someone to believe in her. "You've got the job," she said, "and more than that, you've got our support. We're going to help you get back on your feet, and then we're going to help you build a career. We believe in second chances here because everyone deserves." Marcus started crying. He tried to hide it, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand, but the tears came anyway. "Thank you," he managed. "You have no idea what this means." "I do," Vanessa said softly. "I really do." That evening, Vanessa and David had dinner at her apartment. They had just announced their relationship to the company that afternoon in an email that emphasized their commitment to maintaining professional boundaries while acknowledging their personal connection. The response had been overwhelmingly positive. Employees had sent congratulatory messages, and several had commented that it made sense, that they had noticed the way Vanessa and David worked together with such obvious respect and partnership. As they sat on her balcony watching the sunset, David raised his glass. "To transformation," he said. "To second chances," Vanessa added. They clinked glasses and drank. Then Vanessa set her glass down and looked at him seriously. "I need to tell you something," she said. "When you walked into that lobby 6 months ago dressed as a homeless man, I thought it was the worst moment of my life. I was humiliated, exposed, forced to see the ugliest parts of myself. But it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me." David reached for her hand. "How so?" "Because it woke me up," Vanessa said. "I was sleepwalking through life, chasing success that didn't satisfy me, treating people terribly and telling myself it was justified. You held up a mirror and forced me to look. And yes, what I saw was ugly, but it was also salvageable. You showed me that I could change, that it wasn't too late. We all need mirrors sometimes," David said. "People who love us enough to show us our truth." "I love you," Vanessa said. The words came easily now, though they would have terrified her 6 months ago. "I love you for seeing past that worst moment to who I could become. I love you for being patient while I figured out how to be better. I love you for challenging me and supporting me and believing in me. I love you too, Dave." He pulled her close and they sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Below them, the city hummed with life. Somewhere down there, people were struggling and surviving and hoping for better days. And now, Vanessa was part of making those better days possible, not just for her employees, but for her community. She thought about the journey she had been on, from the woman who screamed at a homeless man to get out, to the woman who now volunteered at shelters and championed hiring programs for the displaced, from the CEO who ruled through fear, to the leader who led with empathy, from the person who measured worth by productivity to the person who recognized inherent human dignity. It had been the hardest work of her life, harder than building her company, harder than any business deal, but it had also been been the most meaningful, because at the end of the day, success wasn't about what you accumulated. It was about who you became and how you treated people along the way. And Vanessa Crawford had finally learned that lesson, taught by a man in disguise who had shown her that true leadership begins with seeing the humanity in everyone, especially those society teaches us to overlook.